I welcome David Gray, who represents the districts and you're a Tewkesbury member. Have I got that right? But you're actually in Winchcombe at the minute.
That's correct. So Winchcombe is part of the borough of Tewkesbury, but
yes.
I'm sitting in Winchcombe but representing Tewkesbury County.
But I'd just like to record our thanks to your predecessor, Nigel Cooper, who was from Stroud and who we knew for a long time and served well on this committee. But welcome to you as his successor. We can now move on to the meeting. Any apologies, Andrea?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Rachel Smith and from Steve Mawson.
From?
Steve Mawson.
Oh, from Steve, right. Okay, thank you. Declarations of interest, members, any beyond those which have already been recorded? I expect, David Gray, you know the form. If you have any vested interest, please notify Andrea Griffiths, and she will record them so that you don't have to repeat yourself every time, unless you've got something new. I expect you're familiar with that system. Are there any public questions, Andrea?
No public questions received.
Any member questions?
No member questions received.
Then can we move to the minutes of the previous meeting? Has anybody any comments, observations, whinges, corrections, and other remarks about these minutes which they would like to draw attention to?
In that case, can we take them as accepted?
Take them as read, then we'll move on. I see that John Arthur's there. Hello, John. Welcome.
Thank you, Colin.
Right. So the first item of note. I'm so sorry. Paul Blacker would like to make an announcement.
Okay, hopefully people can hear me. We've got a bit of feedback, so hopefully it's not too bad. So just two quick announcements. Members of the committee should have received an email about the Local Government Association Pension Fundamentals course, which I think quite a few of you have been on before. They're not doing it in reality, they're doing it virtually this year. I think those members have been on it, said it's very good. It's much shorter, so it's just 3 one-hour sessions this year. Obviously, for new members, it's very important to go on it. So for our new member, if he can make it, that'd be really good. It's on the 6th, 7th and 8th, and there's 3 one-hour sessions each morning. One on the legal structure of the pension scheme, one on investment frameworks, and one on governance and oversight. So if members want to go on that, it's free. Don't get much for free from the Local Government Association. Yeah, the details have been circulated, but Andrea can recirculate them if councillors have lost them. So, and the second point is that many of you will know that Mark Spilsby, the former head of pensions, retired in April, and we've been recruiting since then. The first round was unsuccessful, but I'm pleased to say that we have got a successful appointment now. Matthew Trebilcock, who many of you might have heard of, who currently works at Brunel, has been successful and has accepted the post. We haven't got a definite start date yet, but we're looking forward to him joining us, and I think he's really enthusiastic. I think he's already been in touch with the chair, and he's been in touch with me about his vision, etc. So I'm really looking forward to him starting. Thanks very much. There's a question for Peter.
Peter?
Yeah, it's not really a question. I just wonder if there's a kind of a bio or a career bio for the new head of pensions. I'd be interested to know what his experience is. Yeah,
I can do that once it's subject to reference. It's all formally agreed. I can do that. But basically, he was head of investments and admin at Cornwall Pension Fund previously, and has been working for Brunel since its inception. But I could do a formal pen portrait once we've got the formal letter accepted and all the references checked out. Yeah.
I see Nigel Moore has joined us. Welcome, Nigel.
Thank you, Chairman. Pleased to be here.
So we'll now move on to if the minutes are not are agreed, then I will sign them on your behalf later. we now move on to item 6, which is a presentation on responsible investment and climate change from which is being presented by our friends at Brunel. I don't know who is actually speaking, but we will learn very soon. Who do I hand over to?
I can make a few introductory comments.
Yes, okay. Well, Paul's going to make some comments.
Just to say that members of the committee will be aware that at previous committee meetings, members have expressed a desire to have further information on responsible investment and climate change and Brunel's approach to this. So this presentation is a response to that request. So really nothing more for me to say apart from hand over to Brunel.
Thank you so much, and thank you. Is it right, Andrea, that you're going to be moving the slides on?
Yes, my colleague Joe Bolton will. So every time you want to change the slide, if you can just say next slide, Joe will move it on for you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having us. My name is Laura Hobbs. For those of you who don't know me, I am Responsible Investment Manager at Brunel. I'm also joined on the call by my colleague Helen Price, who is Engagement and Stewardship Manager. And both of us will be giving an update today on our responsible investment work and the work that we've been undertaking on behalf of yourselves and the wider partnership. Next slide, please. So just a reminder that we bring together the assets of 10 like-minded funds. We embed responsible investment through everything that we do, and we work closely with our clients, with yourselves, to ensure that we're meeting your investment and responsible investment outcomes. Next slide, please. So I really wanted to start the presentation by setting the scene. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic has had profound effects and will continue to have profound effects across economies, labour markets, and the way that we go about our lives. It's also had a huge impact on responsible investment and ESG investing. It's really brought this into the spotlight, and I've included here on the presentation some newspaper headlines from the Financial Times and some other media outlets, just really highlighting some of the articles that have picked up. I think COVID-19 has highlighted some of the weaknesses that we have in the financial system. It's really touched on all aspects from inequality to the environment, as well as the need for a sustainable recovery. Next slide, please, Joe. I think the pandemic has also really highlighted the importance of capitalism as a force for good, and it's touched on pretty much all areas of our responsible investment work at Brunel. So I'm not sure if you can all see the slide okay, but on the left, it's a little bit blurry, I apologize, but on the left we have our key responsible investment priorities at Brunel. So they are climate change, the UK policy framework, diversity and inclusion, human capital, cost and tax transparency, cyber and supply chain management. I thought I'd just read those out because I don't know if everyone can see that. And so the COVID-19 pandemic has really heightened our work across all of these areas. Climate change does remain a key focus. I think what the crisis has shown us is that it's absolutely wreaked havoc across the world. And, you know, it only requires a little bit of a stretch of imagination to think what will happen if we fail on addressing climate change. It's also shown us that government can change policy and make policy decisions pretty quickly when there's a crisis. So I think we do have to bear this in mind for climate change. And that it's really heightened the importance of a sustainable and a green recovery, and also a just recovery that makes sure that no one is left behind. The COVID-19 crisis has also really upped the spotlight on the S of ESG, so that's the social aspects. And it's touched on things such as inequality, mental health, labour standards, and I'm going to talk in this presentation about some of the work that we've been doing on these areas as well. So the first part of the presentation will focus on a climate change update, before moving on to some of these social areas. Next slide, please, Joe. Thank you. So an update on Barclays. Many of you are aware that Brunel co-filed the first ever shareholder climate resolution at a major bank in December 2019. We asked Barclays to come up with a plan on how they will be phasing out lending to fossil fuel companies. My colleague Helen Price, who is on the call, led this piece of work. And she is happy to answer any questions or give further detail on it. But I think the key messages are that this is an ongoing piece of engagement. This is very much the start, raising the shareholder resolution and getting almost 24% of support is really just the start. And we'll be following up with Barclays and holding them accountable and continuing our engagement to make sure that they do come up with a plan on phasing out lending to fossil fuel companies that are not aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. We also wanted to highlight our work with BlackRock. We've been engaging with BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, for a number of years now. Last year, they agreed to incorporate sustainability and climate change into their investments. And they cited Brunel as being one of the key drivers to making this change. We had face-to-face meetings with Larry Fink, who's the CEO, and we were pleased by their recent stance. They made the decision to vote against 53 companies and put another 244 on watch for inadequate action over climate change risk. And our engagement with BlackRock continues. I also wanted to give you an update on TCFD. So this is the Task Force for Climate and Financial Related Disclosures. So the Department for Work and Pensions, they launched a consultation last month about whether TCFD should be embedded into UK pensions law. So that consultation, I believe, is underway. The good news is that Brunel have been doing TCFD reports for a number of years. We're currently working on our most recent one, and this will enable clients and yourself to fulfill any obligations if they do incorporate this requirement into UK pensions law. Another update I'd like to give is that we joined an IIGCC, so this is an international global organization on climate change, to pilot a new set of methodologies and studies. Next slide, please. I have more details on this. And what this project is it's being developed with 70 global investors representing $16 trillion. And what the project is effectively is to work out how we can construct portfolios that keep global temperatures below 1.5 degrees of warming. Because at the moment, there is very little understood about what a portfolio aligned to Paris Agreement actually looks like in practice, how that will perform from a financial point of view. Will it still meet the obligations, that for your beneficiaries? So this project is effectively coming up with some methodologies and testing those methodologies in practice. And Brunel is one of 5 investors that have actually submitted some hypothetical portfolios so that they can be modelled, and climate change modelling will enable us to see what the impacts are financially and whether those methodologies can be advanced. So this is a really cutting edge piece of work. This is a new project. It hasn't been done before, so it's exciting, and we're looking forward to seeing the results towards the back end of this year. Next slide, please. So that was our update on our recent climate change work, and what I wanted to talk about now is some of the work we've been doing around the social aspect, and particularly the issues that COVID has created. So I'm going to cover some of the issues around inequality, in particular racial inequality, and my colleague Helen has been leading on this, as well as labour standards, modern human slavery, and workplace mental health. Next slide, please. So Helen will be talking about our work on diversity. So just over to Helen for this slide, please.
Thank you, Laura. So Brunel's done quite a lot of work in the past around gender diversity and looking at other areas and following sort of the riots that we've seen this year and the impact that it's had on different members across society. I published a blog earlier on in the year to reflect on the work we've undertaken so far and to also reflect on where we haven't put as much action in place. So historically, a lot of diversity talk focuses around gender and then everything else gets coupled together. So we've really been focusing on working with partners across the industry, working with the 30% Club and the Diversity Project to identify what action we can take, looking to ensure that others are embedding it into their stewardship policy and their voting action, such as Brunel has started to do, and identifying where we can get access to data and engage with companies as well as our asset managers across the industry to basically do better and looking at what the barriers and challenges are. So it's an ongoing piece of work that we are reflecting on and we'll be embedding further into the work we do. Next slide, thanks.
Thank you. The COVID pandemic has also created huge amounts of issues around the labour crises, particularly in countries in the Middle East. So for those of you who are not aware, countries in the Middle East have a considerably high proportion of migrant labour working in industries such as airline, freight, and leisure and hospitality. And as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, we've seen a lot of these migrant labour force laid off from work. And effectively, they have very little employment rights. A lot of their jobs are secured through employment agencies that they have to pay, and they often have to take out large loans in order to secure their jobs. It's effectively modern human slavery. So we're seeing a huge amount of migrants now stuck in the Middle East, unable to get back to their home countries as they have no jobs now to fund those airfares, sorry. So what have we been doing about it? We've been engaging alongside 38 other investors, a huge amount of assets backing this. We've written to 54 companies who have operations in the Gulf, and we're asking companies to commit to reimbursing recruitment fees, to performing exit interviews with these staff, and to performing best practice on labour outsourcing so that these kind of issues can be addressed. Next slide, please. One of the other areas that we've been working on, again, on a collaborative engagement with other investors is around workplace mental health. We know that mental health has a huge cost to the UK economy and to UK employers. And we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has heightened that with people struggling with isolation, home working, having to quarantine, and obviously in some cases having to deal with grief. So we've written to all companies within the FTSE 100, and we've asked them to train line managers on how to spot signs of poor mental health, how to assist vulnerable employees, increasing flexibility in job design, and making sure that employees know how to access support when they need to. Next slide, please. So bringing all of this together, all of the work that we do in partnership with yourselves and with our other clients, every year, and this is the first year that Brunel have done the assessment, it's a United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment assessment. It's a third party that assesses Brunel on how well we are addressing responsible investment and how well we are embedding it throughout the organisation, across strategy and governance, our listed equities, our private markets, property, infrastructure, and our active engagement. So this was the first year of us having to complete this assessment, and we were pleased that we were awarded A+ in every category apart from listed equities active ownership, which was given an A, and we were ahead of the median scores across all categories. The full report is published on our website for those that are interested in reading. It's pretty long, I'm going to warn you, but for those who are interested in digging in and looking at that. And next slide, please. And just on the final slide, we were pleased to win a Sustainable Finance Award Pension Fund of the Year. And this award was for the strength of the partnership, of Brunel Pension Partnership, the way that we collaborate with clients and that we work together to ensure that we're meeting your responsible investment priorities as well as your investment needs. So that's the end of our presentation. We thought we would keep it a fairly brief update so that we could allow plenty of time for any questions or comments that anyone has.
Thank you very much, Laura and Helen. Now, members, we're aware that some of these issues actually arrive in our debating chamber from time to time through various political pressure groups. We won't bother to name them. But I think the work that is being done by Brunel on our behalf is a counter to some of those more extreme comments that we hear levied at us from time to time. And I'm sure the members will have some any questions, members.
Colin has a question. Colin's raised his hand.
Yes, Colin.
Thank you. I've got a couple of just quick questions. But first of all, I think to echo your comments, Ray, I found that a really interesting presentation, and the presentation which I see the disclaimer at the bottom, but I think that really ought to go to all councillors, both in county and district, because climate change is clearly being debated in those chambers. And a lot of money is invested through those with those councils with Brunel, and I don't know about sparing blushes, but I think it's really exciting to be part of Brunel that's leading the field in so many ways. So please take that back. I really feel that that's some great work that's going on. If the presentation is to be made available in some ways, then I think I listened but missed what TCFD was, and I think that ought to be expanded in the presentation. I mean, I think I can remember, but if anyone else was looking, they might be a bit, they may not know what that is. And then I think one of the things that's the counter to, or at least from the other side, is the effect it has on our investments compared to if we didn't bother. And I think that's worth highlighting for those that maybe think that, it's all very nice and good to go with ESG, but what's the bottom line? And that's also useful in a presentation, so that we understand what the effect is. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm fully in favour of ESG, and I suppose other members of the committee will know that. But I think that's a useful thing to put in presentations such as this.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your kind words and also your feedback, Colin. In terms of making the presentation available, I will touch base internally with Chris and the client team to establish whether we can do that.
Sorry, Laurie, I mean, it is a public presentation, so it can be circulated. Andrea, I'm not sure if you have a PDF copy, which you can arrange to circulate, or if you'd like us to send something different.
No, that's fine. Just to say, I do have the PDF version, and it's also available on the Pensions Committee website page for this meeting. As it's a public document, it is there in the public domain if anyone wishes to access it.
Picking
some
up
additional publicity for it would be would help.
Picking up your point on TCFD, yeah, apologies, I should have expanded that in the presentation. So it's the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And what it is it's asking companies to look at how they assess climate change risk through both their investments and also their own operations. So as I mentioned, Brunel we've been reporting on this for a number of years now. If this is embedded into UK pensions law, it will be something that yourselves will have to do. But the good news is that Brunel is already doing it. So it's effectively taking the work that we're doing, almost pulling it out of our report, and that will satisfy the regulatory needs. But we have to see where that one is going and what the outcome from the consultation, the DWP consultation is.
Sorry.
Can I just comment on that? I thought it was a very good idea, Colin, that we should circulate this. Of course, we can do so by telling our colleagues in the district to draw attention to the members to this presentation, and we can send them the link. That's the easy way. There may be other ways too, which we could consider. We could circulate this presentation. So that they know exactly what we're about with their money. It may not just be the districts, it may be some of the other employers. We should perhaps do it to all employers, but particularly I think the districts, who are such large employers within this fund. So thank you very much for raising that, Colin. Now, was it John? John Arthur?
Ray, I've got John, Sean, and then Lyndon.
Right, okay, John?
Yes, just very quickly, just echoing Colin's comments. In terms of leadership in ESG areas and responsible investments, I regard Brunel very highly, not just within the LGPS sector, but within broader asset managers in the UK. I note that one of your other pools has just with much fanfare announced the appointment of their first ESG officer. That compares to Brunel, who had this embedded in their system and process from the very creation of the company. I remain impressed with what they do at this area and is supportive of their approach.
Thank you, John. Just for David Gray's information, John is our advisor. He's advisor to this committee, financial advisor or investment advisor to this committee. Thank you very much, John. Who was the next one? Was it Sean?
Sean and Lyndon.
Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. I still don't quite understand what EFG actually stands for. I know what it's about. I'm quite interested actually what it actually means in words, the 3 words, whatever it is.
Yeah, so ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance.
No, I've got that one. It's the other one which I'm talking about. The EFG, what is it, EFGD, was it you had later on in the presentation?
Oh, TCFD.
Yes.
And that's the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures.
Thank you. That helps me. That's not really my point, but it just tightens it up. What I'm actually interested in is that I realise that this is creates a very useful, very important dialogue with companies. Presumably in practical terms, you then rate the companies, which we're investing in. At what point would you sort of decide that you can no longer invest in a company? And are there any companies in which you've taken that decision? And is there such a list of companies produced?
So we actually invest through third-party fund managers, and we hold our fund managers to account on what they are doing. So we have our clear and transparent set of needs that we communicate to them. So, for example, we have our climate change policy that was launched earlier this year, which sets out our clear expectations on what we expect from managers and what we expect from companies. And as part of this climate change policy, we have committed to a stock take in 2022. So we've committed to assessing our managers and effectively deciding whether they should still remain appointed to manage your money and to manage the money of other Brunel clients. We use lots of external data to assess companies and to assess what our fund managers are doing. So one example is of the types of data that we're using are things such as the Transition Pathway Initiative, TPI. So this is publicly available data. Anyone can go onto the website and have a look. And what the TPI does is assess the way that companies are looking at climate change risk. So whether they have set goals, whether they've set targets to reduce their emissions, the way that the companies are managing climate change at a board level, and how their business model is aligned with the Paris Agreement. So this is one of the measures that we use, for example, to assess the extractives companies and fossil fuel companies. And we have active dialogue with our managers on where a company is particularly poorly rated. We will pick up our managers on that and question them and challenge them as to why they are holding that. I don't know if Helen has anything to add, because Helen's actually responsible for a lot of the engagement work that we do directly with companies, and can talk a little bit more about some of that side of things.
Thanks, Laura. We have an escalation process in place. So if we are engaging with companies and we feel that progress isn't being made, then we will review the action we can take. A prime example of that was with Barclays. We have sent letters asking to discuss their lending practices to fossil fuel companies, and after reviewing, we felt that further action was required. Now, we partnered with Share Action and a number of other investors in proposing that shareholder resolution, which was the first, as we mentioned, the first one for a European bank. That actually led to the bank themselves committing to be net zero by 2050. I really don't want to undersell what a monumentous success it was to achieve that from a bank. And it will lead to more fruitful conversations with other banks and development from them. And we won't stop there. It continues. As we mentioned, we got over 23% for the shareholder resolution we proposed. That means that Barclays will need to respond within 6 months. In November, they will be publishing their short-term targets to see how they can realise their ambition. And we'll continue to work with Share Action and other investors engaging with them. So that's an example of how we've sort of escalated our engagement there. And as Laura mentioned, within the climate change policy, we've got policies around the Transition Pathway Initiative and expectations of progression along the levels there. And we do take voting action against companies who are failing to meet the disclosure requirements, which includes setting disclosing around Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions. And this will all feed into the stocktake next year, 2022, where we will review the engagement approach and have conversations with the clients, who are ultimately the ones who make the decision as to what things that you're happy to be invested in.
So just
something there.
Yes. Oh, I was going to say, just to summarize all of that, we, at the moment, we do not tell our fund managers what they can and can't invest in. So we don't say you must not hold this, because we want managers to really think about what they're doing and to be able to hold them to account. We know that the financial industry is actually not fit for purpose, and that is what we're trying to achieve with the aims of our climate change policy. We are reviewing whether it's the right decision to not have an exclusions list, we're engaging actively through client group. So please feed any views through to your officers and back to us on how you feel about that. And 2022 really is the kind of stick for this.
Can I just come back, because I got confused there, if I might. You started off by saying you deal through your fund managers, which I take down his head because that's your first line. Then you said you had to go and pressure. You said you had been going down as far as some individual investments, but then you say it's up to the fund managers. I don't fully understand why Brunel is necessarily disappearing off to go and talk to Barclays, as distinct from saying to the fund managers, please will you go and talk to Barclays. I mean, I'm quite happy with the fact that you're bringing pressure, obviously, but I'm just interested in the procedure going on. So is Brunel going to all sorts of companies? I don't know, Exxon or Shell or the oil companies, BP, etc., some of the chemical companies, or are you just going to the fund managers?
So we have a variety of different engagement approaches. So the fund managers themselves will be engaging on your behalf, but we are the your beneficiaries are the ultimate sort of shareholders of these companies, and they might not be covering all of the different aspects. So we utilise an external engagement provider, Federated Hermes EOS, who will take a review of the holdings and where they see potential risk or opportunities. And so they engage across all of the Brunel portfolios on your behalf. As I mentioned, the asset managers are also engaging. We work with numerous initiatives that may be targeting specific areas such as diversity, who collaboratively the group may engage with companies as well. And then in select instances, Brunel may identify select companies where we wish to do something ourselves. It's all about managing resources. Obviously, our asset managers can't engage with every single company that they're holding. So it's about bringing all these different tools together to ensure that we're engaging as best we can across the portfolio of holdings.
Fine. My final question, if I might, is: has this actually led to any firm? I mean, apart from discussions going on, and obviously I well know that quite a lot of companies are adjusting their policies. Has it led to any firm investment decisions, like we will no longer invest in X? Or has that not taken place as yet? I might be quite a small company for all I know.
No, so that has not taken place yet. That's whether we want to go down the exclusionary route is something that needs to be obviously agreed with clients and with yourself. Those discussions are underway at the moment. And yeah, any policies from that will have to come from yourselves if that is a route that you want to take.
Just to add in there, following Laura's comments, where our asset managers have their own internal policies in place, where they choose not to invest in certain areas, then we do ask for them to apply this at the highest level. And we do have certain things in place through the climate change policy. For example, we're seeking a year-on-year 7% reduction in carbon emissions. So this does create some sort of policy framework in which our asset managers need to operate within. So you can't eat the whole cake, pick your slices of where you want to invest. And then, as mentioned, we'll be reviewing that in the Stocktake 2022 as to whether the partnership feels that further measures need to be implemented.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think I'll leave it there for the moment. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Andrea, who's next?
We've got Lyndon, Peter, and then Chris would like to come back, please. Sorry.
Lyndon?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And my question really is about: is there any sharing of workload on this agenda with the other funds? Now, I'm saying that because there's obviously a cost involved to Brunel, ultimately to its shareholders, ultimately to its the employers in a fund. When I guess that all the funds have got the same basic need or want to look and do something about this very seriously. So is there any joint working going on so that in effect, the costs of leadership and the benefits are wider spread than just with, say, the constituent members of Brunel? Also, to avoid the obvious duplication, even triplication, whatever, given, I think, is 10 funds or something in the country. Are we ensuring that we're not all picking up the same bill and across the country, paying 10 times for the same job?
On the pools, isn't it, you're talking about, Lyndon?
Pools, yeah.
Now, who's going to pick that one up?
I can answer this question. The Brunel are part of a cross-pool responsible investment working group. So we meet quite regularly with my sort of peer across the pools and in the underlying pension fund. So we meet on a quarterly basis and in regular communication, sharing sort of best practice, what the challenges are we're facing, what the engagement objectives are that we're undertaking. There's also, as Laura mentioned, we're a member of the United Nations Principle of Responsible Investment, and they have a collaboration platform. So collectively, asset managers and asset owners will post onto that platform the engagement that they're taking and seek collaboration. So typically, when we're engaging with companies, you'll have lead investors that will take charge and maybe some co-leads, and then you'll have supporters. So, for example, with Climate Action 100+, the initiative that's engaging with the top 100, and the next 60 largest contributors to climate change, there's lead investors. So Hermes, our engagement provider, are leading on several of those engagements, and other parties across the industry are leading on others and taking feed-in from the group. So there is a real great centralisation of collaboration. And the UNPR actually launched Active Ownership 2.0 earlier this year, which enhances and focuses on the need to collaborate and collectively work together to make progress. So we're definitely talking to one another to ensure that we're utilising our resources in the best way possible.
Thank you, Helen. Next, who was next, Andrea?
Peter.
Peter?
Yeah, hi there. Yeah, I've just got a few things, actually. The first one is just to sort of attach to the thread that's gone through a lot of this. The last time we were briefed by Brunel, one of the companies that you were talking about not complying with your ESG standards was a large energy company. I want to say Exxon, but I can't actually remember which company it was, and I hadn't been receptive to any approaches. So that happened 6 months ago. So if that happens, what do you do? What have you done in relation
so it probably was Exxon that was referred to. We do not hold Exxon in any of our active portfolios. It's only within the passive portfolios, and that is because it is within the benchmark. At last year's AGM and this year's AGM, we voted against the entire Exxon board and had conversations with the lead engager there. So in terms of our approach, we were not able to sell Exxon because it is within the passive portfolio. So it becomes ongoing dialogue with our passive provider, and then conversations with our clients at the stock take as to what it is you'd like us to do in those cases. It could be reviewing. I know that there's some work being undertaken following feedback from clients looking at benchmarks that are available, and it could be reviewing that. And we do have options within the passive portfolio. We've got a low carbon option, so there are alternative investments available that clients can look at and review. As I said, it's held passively, so it's not an option if we need to sell it, but looking at what the options are with the products that are available and continue to engage and utilise the tools such as voting where possible.
Have you got another question?
It's basically kind of indirect pressure in that you stop investing in them if they don't react to your thing, although you're not out of the position to do that, are you? Because that's not been agreed.
Yeah, we're not in a position to do that with the passive portfolio because it's held within the benchmark.
Okay, another question. So on the social side of ESG, obviously we're entering into a period where unemployment will increase rapidly and the number of jobs available will decrease, and also there'll be more regulatory space following the exit from our transition agreement with the European Union. So those things leave open more exploitative labour practices, certainly in countries like Britain and America. Is that something that you've talked about the Middle East? Is that something that Brunel will also be looking at in the market?
Yes, it is. It absolutely is. So we've also, I didn't include it on the slides, we've also been part of an engagement programme on UK listed companies that are perhaps not performing to the best kind of labour standards, and are also in industries that mean that unscrupulous labour practices are more common. So particularly, for example, within the kind of agriculture sector and the leisure and hospitality, it's known that where there are kind of 0-hour contracts and things like that, we know that labour standards can often be poorer. So that is something on our spotlight. We have been engaging with companies through that, and it's definitely one of our focus areas going forwards to collaborate with our engagement provider, Federated Hermes. We know that labour practices is one of their key priority areas. So it's definitely will be remaining on the agenda. Helen, did you have anything to add on this?
Yeah, sure. So one of the engagements we've undertaken over the last year is around the UK modern slavery statement. There's a lot of companies that haven't been keeping up to date with legislation and then updating those annually, and we integrated that into our voting policy earlier this year. The UK government actually updated some of the guidelines around that yesterday that are going to set out more mandatory requirements for the statements to be more explicit and go into further detail. So we'll certainly follow up with Rathbones, who's leading on that, and continue looking at that area going forward. We've also recently just joined the Workforce Disclosure Initiative, which is currently being run by Share Action. They seek to get social data from companies, and they'll work on different initiatives around sort of diversity, but also looking at things through their Good Work Coalition of the living wages and their newly introduced living hours, so looking at precarious working practices and the impact from zero contract hours. So it's certainly an area of focus and something that we're looking at going forward.
Now, I think, is David Brown, are you next? Is David Brown next?
No, sorry, Ray. I've got Chris Crozier who'd like to come back, Nigel Moore, and I think Sean Parsons would like to come back.
Yeah. Well, Chris, can I ask you to wait a bit? Because I'd like to hear from the members first, and we won't forget that. But I think, David, you've been waiting.
Thank you for that, Chair. Yeah, and thank you for the presentation. I thought it was extremely good. I learnt quite a lot. And like Colin, I'm encouraged by the direction things are going. Although, just to emphasise Colin's point about, I think a comparison with the bottom line would be interesting. You know, what if we didn't do any of this? Because there will be those who question some of the decisions. But you mentioned in the presentation about portfolio models. I think it was IIGCC, portfolio modeling, and you also talked about the migrant workers in the Middle East. And I mean, Peter mentioned some of this, but I'm just wondering, are you detecting any geographical bias in some of these portfolio modeling, as far as, you know, there are countries who are not seem not to be taking the move towards reducing fossil fuels seriously. I'm just wondering if there's a geographical bias that you're detecting.
No, those are really good points, actually. So in terms of looking, I'll take one of your first points you mentioned in terms of looking, you know, if we didn't do anything in the portfolios, what we actually have on the website is a carbon metrics report. And what this shows is the carbon footprints of all of the Brunel portfolios against their benchmarks. So the benchmarks are effectively if you did nothing, and the Brunel portfolios are through implementation of our climate change policy. So that's publicly available. That may be of interest to yourselves to look at that. Through the IIGCC modelling, we're hoping to be able to see what the real impacts are, going forwards. If we do align our portfolios to 1.5 degrees of warming, what impacts will that have financially? What will the portfolio look like? We're really looking forward to those results, actually, and it's an industry-wide initiative. So it's not just Brunel portfolios; it's for other investors too. So it will be interesting to see those results. In terms of your second question around geographies, I mean, absolutely, we obviously see emerging markets lagging on things such as labour standards and on things such as disclosures around fossil fuels. So we do see that emerging market companies disclose a lot less, but that is changing, and that is changing through investor pressure. We've also seen, for example, the announcement made by China, I think it was it yesterday or the day before, about wanting to become a net zero economy. I think it was by 2050. So things are changing, and things are changing with investor pressure, and it is certainly, you know, something that feeds into our strategy, that the different risks in different geographies and how that will impact on our engagement strategy and on our investment risk strategy.
Thank you very much for that, Laura. Nigel Moore. Nigel?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, like everyone else, Laura, I really found that really engaging. Each autumn, Gloucestershire County Council reports on the progress that we as a council are making on our reducing our carbon emissions, both across our estate, also across the whole process. And it seems to me that it'd be very useful when we publish that report, because that report goes both to government and obviously is made available to the general public. I think it would be really good to include in that some form of report from yourselves on that annual basis as to the success that you're also making in terms of, you've already given us a good indication of the kind of targets you're setting, but it'd be helpful each year, I think, to have that report from you, which could be included in our overall assessment of the progress we're making.
Yeah, we publish our, as I said, our carbon metrics report, but we also publish an annual responsible investment outcomes report, and that's available on our website, but it was also made available pre-publication to our underlying clients, so that if they wanted to take any of the graphics or any of the information in their own reporting, that was something that we made available. So the next outcomes report, we're hoping to, I think it's Q1, is it, Helen, or Q2? Not sure of the timescale, but I mean, it was published this year in May. So the 2021 report will be published next year in spring.
Okay, who should I ask our officers to get in touch with? Yourself or?
I think Chris is probably the best person, and then he can direct internally to either myself or Faith or Helen, who are the team at Brunel.
Okay, thanks very much for that.
Chris, you were indicating earlier on, but will you pick up that point? You're happy to pick up that point just made?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it is important for the county council to be able to make these representations, make it clear what we are about. The pension fund is the largest liability that the council has, and to show that it supports these initiatives that Brunel has taken and put them in the wider context of for us, put it in the context of what we're doing, I think it would be very helpful to us to be able to do that. So there will be a question of timing. You know, I don't know how the documentation you have to send off, Nigel, when it is. But as long as I think you give Chris plenty of notice, then I think we would. I'm sure Brunel would be very happy to do that. Chris, perhaps I put words into your mouth, perhaps.
No, absolutely, we're very happy to help out with that, right? I think Laura and Helen have both mentioned the website that we have. There's a lot of usable responsible investment information on there, which anybody, you know, yourselves as members of the committee or even members of the underlying fund can go to at any time, so people can keep abreast of updates we're making and progress that we make with these various initiatives. But the more formal reporting is done on an annual basis, and we'll make sure that that's obviously shared with your officers. Is
that all right, Nigel?
Yes, that's really helpful. Thank you, Chairman.
Can I just add on that one, Chairman, that that would also be useful for all the employers, because also would help to get rid of the misconception sometimes that this is just a Gloucestershire County Council pension fund, when it's got, you know, a multitude of other employers. So I think if something were drafted that the districts and whatever, you know, academies, all that were able to use it as well, I think that would be very useful.
Yeah, I think that we've got over 200 employers, haven't we? Paul?
Yeah.
So there are quite a lot of participants, and well, let's see how with our own participants how we can engage with them in this respect, and that might head off a lot of difficulty that they may have with the inquiries which they receive. Thank you very much for mentioning that, Lyndon. Now, members, we've reached the end of the time that we've allocated for this. Unless there's anybody else particularly wishing to jump in, I propose to thank Laura and Helen. Chris, do jump in. Yes.
Thank you. Just really a couple of very quick points. We mentioned the website there, which is a good source of information for people. We're also working to prepare a regular, which may be quarterly, maybe 3 times a year, responsible investment newsletter, which again would go via offices, but would be a public document that we'll be able to share. We're very, very conscious of how much interest and appetite there is in this area, and we're definitely keen to help you get that message out to your members that we are groundbreaking, I think is the word. You know, we're right at the forefront of this with the support from all of the partner funds. So it's very important to get that message out and understood. Just one other very quick point in terms of the way the portfolios are structured. As Laura mentioned, the IIGCC initiative is ongoing to model portfolios towards that 1.5 degree alignment. We have a partner fund engaged with us. We also see a great deal of demand from a number of other council, a number of other members, the Environment Agency, Oxfordshire particularly. What your new pensions officer will be able to do is look at the CAD process we have at Brunel. So if you have the demand there to build a portfolio that serves a specific purpose, that's something that we can always look at to tailor the targets and the outcomes that we're looking to deliver for you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Well, if there are no further questions, I'd like to thank Laura and Helen and Chris for coming to give us this presentation today. And as you see, there's been a great deal of interest on the part of the members, and we see that the people that we represent will also be interested to hear what we're doing in this area, and we will certainly make great efforts to ensure that they are informed about that. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you ever so much.
Andrea, I think you're quite welcome to stay, members of Brunel, if you want to, for this session. Anyway, I think later on we may have a problem with when we go into confidential session, but for this session, you're welcome to stay. And Andrea, I think we now move on to item 7. Julie West is going to give us an actuarial update. So over to you, Julie.
Morning, everybody. Hi there.
Morning.
Yeah, so hopefully you've got the paper in your pack. It sets out there's been an awful lot of regulatory changes over the last few months. I won't go into the paper in a lot of detail, but I'll kind of summarise the key issues. I guess at the start of the summer we had the exit credit regulation changes, which allowed the fund to repay any surpluses back to any employers when they leave the fund, and that's the policy that we've got coming after this item. On the regulation changes, I'm sure you'll all be aware of the McLeod judgment, and this relates back to when the schemes were changed from final salary to career average. And protections were put in place for any members within 10 years of retirement to make sure that they were not any worse off when they came to retire. So if you were age 55 or over at 31st of March 2012, when you came to retire, you got the better of the benefit. So either the benefit you would have earned in the care scheme or the benefit you would have earned in the final salary scheme. For most members, it will be the benefit in the care scheme because of the generosity of the care scheme. So they're getting a 49th accrual as opposed to 60th. So the only way really that underpin bites is if salary increases over that period are significant to overtake the extra accrual in the care scheme. So that was the benefit as it stood. That case went to court by the transitional protections applied to all of the public service schemes, and it was a member of the judicial scheme, the firefighter scheme, and it took them to court, to the government's court, to state that the transitional protections were age discriminatory. That went through quite a long process, and they initially lost the case, and the government appealed, and they lost that appeal, and they sought to appeal again, and there was no further grounds for appeal. So that case remains, and they recently proposed the remedy for that case. And it really is to make those transitional protections in place for all of the people, so all of the staff that were in the scheme at 31st March 2012. So they'll get the better of that benefit. From an actuarial point of view, in terms of your pension fund liabilities, we expect the impact to be small. Obviously, it is an increase in benefit, but because we don't expect there to be that many cases where the final salary benefit would be greater, that's why there's not expected to be a significant impact on pension fund liabilities. However, what it is going to impact is the administration of the scheme. So for every member of the scheme who is eligible for that benefit, when they come to retire, there'll be 2 benefit calculations will have to be carried out. The complexity of that, which I don't believe is an issue for the Gloucestershire Fund, but is an issue for many funds around the country, is that since the care schemes have been in place, there's been no requirement to collect some of the data that's necessary to calculate that benefit underpin. And so now there's a really large admin task to go back and seek that data from employers who could even have left the scheme, or in respect of employees who could have left the scheme. So from an administration point of view, this is significant, and we expect this to be a significant project for pension fund admin teams, probably for the next 2 years, with some dedicated resource to resolve this issue alone. Okay, so that's McLeod. Any questions on McLeod before I move on?
Is everybody absolutely clear about what this is about? I'm sure you are. Thank you very much. I am totally bemused. I mean, for the government to take on a bunch of judges doesn't seem a very good thing to do, especially if they've got their own interests at heart. I think we hear about this McLeod issue, and I've always thought it's an issue of discrimination, but I've no idea what it might have. What impact it may have on us. I don't know whether Paul Blacker, whether we've done any work on this. It's certainly something that Matthew Trebillock, when he joins us, could get his teeth into. But I was encouraged by what you said, Julie, that you didn't think the impact on us was very great. But of course, the cost of getting it all, assuring ourselves of these is maybe a bit greater. So I don't know what the implications are, Paul, whether you've had a chance to look at that yet. And the implications for financially and in resources in researching what our possible liability could be.
Thanks, Ray. I think I just echo what Julie said, really, that we think that value, the actuarial value, is going to be quite small because most people are going to stick with the care scheme. But as Julie said, the big issue is the administrative issue, where rather than just doing one calculation when someone retires, we've got to do 2 for all employees, and that's quite a significant burden. But fortunately, as Julie said, we have been keeping all the records up to date. So although it will be an extra burden, it's one that we can kind of manage with some extra resources. I think some of the funds will really be struggling because they just won't have the information to do those calculations. I believe we have got that information. It just means we have to do twice as much work whenever anyone retires.
Yeah, well, yes, but when people keep telling us that the impact's likely to be small. What do we mean by small? £1 million, 2 million? 50,000. What? What's the range of our possible liability? Does anybody know at this stage?
Yeah, so it's probably it's less than 1% of your liabilities.
That's a large amount. What our total liabilities are something like what are they? What 2-point-something billion?
Yeah.
You scared me to death, Julie. If that's small in actuarial terms, I'm now very worried. I mean, we've got 2.2 billion in funds at the minute, approximately. So you tell me, you're the mathematician. 1% of that would be what?
Yeah. So I mean, the reason it's small in actuarial terms is because it gets completely drowned out by, investment returns, for example. So less than 1% of liabilities, yes, in cost terms, it is, but in terms of in comparison to the whole of your fund, something like life expectancy changing by a year, that has about a 3 to 5% impact on liabilities. So there's in terms of an actuarial risk, it's small. For example, discount rate changing or inflation changing, so it's quite far down on the list in terms of significance on that front. But the focus really is in terms of the admin. I was speaking to a fund yesterday who probably are a little bit smaller than yours, and they think they've got about 10,000 cases that they have to work through. So it's it's quite significant. While I say it's small at fund level, there may be some employers who there's a material impact for, depending on the profile of their membership. So they have a particular, especially a small employer, if they have a member who is all of a sudden getting a significantly larger benefit, it could impact at employer level.
I'm just informed by my mathematicians that it's the impact on us, if it's 1%, could be £2 million or so, which we'd be very reluctant to hand over. John Arthur's shaking his head. He doesn't think it's that much, but let's go there because we don't know the figures. We'll go there in due course, and we'll have to have a project, I suppose, Paul, to work through this.
I think 1% is 20 million, not 2 million. It's,
2 million. That's what John's thinking. So thank you very much, Sean. Clearly, your work at the bank was more useful than mine.
It's significantly less, and certainly in terms of the calculations we've done, it's significantly less than 1%. So we did add an allowance for it into your some of your numbers, and I think it changed the active liability by 1 million. So certainly from our perspective, it's small, but it is still an additional cost.
Okay, we'll have to find that out for ourselves. But it's a cost for the fund, not for the authority, of course. Yeah, okay, could you please move on then, Julie? We'll come back.
Ray, sorry to interrupt. I've got Colin's been waiting to ask a question. So is Nigel.
Yeah, Colin?
Yeah, I was just interested to know what happens to someone who was a member of the pension fund, left local authority employment, and then rejoins. What happens with those people when they re-enter employment? Do they still have the benefit of choosing, or are they automatically on the career average as opposed to final salary?
Yeah, so it's not a choice. It's not a member choice. It's the benefit, the way in which the scheme is administered. So a member doesn't choose to stay in the final salary scheme or the career average scheme. The administration team have to calculate two benefits, and the member gets the better of those benefits when they come to retire. In the case where somebody's left, they're eligible for that underpin for the period prior to them leaving. So it would be depending on the timing of them leaving, but it would be eligible for that benefit to apply then. And then it depends when they rejoin. If they rejoin the local government scheme, they have an option about whether they join up the two pieces of service or they can leave them separate. So they effectively have almost what we call a deferred record when somebody has worked and then leaves employment. So they've got that option to join up those two service records. Obviously, if they don't join them up, then all the protections would remain in place for the previous record. I'm not too sure what happens if they join them up, whether they get the benefit of that protection on that whole period of service or not.
I think we're getting a bit detailed here. I think we can give this headache to our newly appointed fund manager, and see what he comes up for. But I think you'd be a candidate for the project team, Colin, if you're not careful. Peter, did you want to say something briefly?
Yeah, it's just it's an admin question. So, when will members know whether this is affecting their pension return? Because obviously that's what they care about, and it's something they need to know as accurately as possible.
So that's probably...
sorry to raise just on the call. So, I'm not entirely sure. Julie, do you know that? I think it'll just be when they retire, won't it? That when the pensions are calculated and they get the best of both. I'm not sure how it's incorporating the annual benefit statements.
It should be in the annual benefit statement. So it would really just be whenever the project begins to start rectifying those records. And yeah, so it would be whenever that, because it's not just at retirement that benefit, the best of benefit would be calculated. It would also need to be calculated every year for annual benefit statements as well. So it would just be whenever that project is underway and happening.
Yeah, that was my question though. So, I mean, reading the information in your report, it looks like that's likely to be 21, 22 at the earliest. So it's just that obviously my position being here is a members rep, but there's nothing more important to members than knowing what money they've got when they retire.
Yeah, so we've just issued the annual benefit statement, so obviously it wasn't incorporated into that. But I think they will be sort of trying to work on a project to get it involved into the next annual benefit statements.
Okay, can we move on, please, Julie?
Yep. Okay. So
sorry, can I just follow up on that question that I asked, which is there is a complication with people who go in and out of service, and it's the admin cost of that and the way in which it's reported. Because if somebody leaves and they've got the choices that Julie says, then as they join and the longer they remain in employment with the local authority, the benefit of either linking the two or keeping them separate becomes an issue. And then the reporting becomes twice as complicated. And for those people that may go in and out of service with the local authority, maybe several times, that becomes even more complicated. And I was just thinking about the admin of that and linked to what Peter was saying about the annual statement, because that's going to be horrendous by the looks of it.
Colin, you're quite right. It's going to be horrendous. But we're employing a nice man who's going to sort it all out together with Julie, I hope, and we'll get this right somehow. But you're right. It sounds to me as though it's going to be some new employees taken on in our administration area to help cope with this. But can we please move on now? Otherwise, we'll all run out of time. So, Julie, could you continue, please?
Yep. Okay. So, in the paper is cost management valuations. If you think McLeod is confusing, this is equally so. So again, when the scheme was changed from final salary to career average, one of the original recommendations in Lord Hutton's report was to put in place a cost cap mechanism. That was to make sure that the cost of the scheme couldn't go unchecked. So this was in a period, the timing of that report was in a period where life expectancy had continued to increase. The scheme was being reformed to try and limit the costs. And so his recommendation was to ensure that that cost couldn't keep increasing in the future, and there was a mechanism to bring that back in line. What happened between the report and the implementation of the benefits was through the discussions and agreement with the unions, the cost cap became cost sharing. And what that meant was there's a set cost of the scheme that's calculated in a different way from the way in which your funding actually would calculate the cost. So the government actually calculates the cost of the scheme, but only includes some things within that calculation. And they would check the cost of the scheme at 4 yearly intervals. If the cost of the scheme was outside of a either +2 or -2% of their allowed cost, changes had to be made to benefits to bring them back in line to that original cost. They calculated the first round of these valuations back in 2016. And the scheme costs, as determined by the government actuary, had decreased outside of that buffer. So the cost had decreased by more than 2%. And what that meant was benefits within the LGPS had to increase. That mechanism, that the increase in the benefits was put on hold until the McLeod judgment was rectified. At the same time as they announced the remedy, they also announced that evaluation was unpaused. So just to remind you, we're still talking about a 2016 valuation here, and this will happen again in 2020. So it's been unpaused. We don't know the outcome of that yet. We don't know whether the McLeod remedy will be included within that cost. So it may be that when you include the McLeod remedy, it brings the cost back inside that cost window. I think there's that in itself has been taken to court at the moment. The summary of this is that there is also the potential for future benefit increases as a result of this cost cap valuation. And those benefit changes would have to apply retrospectively back to 1st of April 2019. So we're still awaiting what the outcome of that is. Again, helpful to be aware that that's another potential admin challenge.
Thank you, Julie. So that's work in progress then. We're not quite sure where that leads us, I think, is what you're saying. So there's lots of clarification needed before we can embark on any work ourselves. I don't think we note what you say, but I don't think, members, that there's much more we can add, unless anybody has any questions for Julie on that. If not, then I think you're next on the agenda as well, Julie.
You're talking about the 95% cap.
Sorry, the 95% cap. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry.
Please carry on.
Sorry, I think Colin had another question to come back on. Do you, Colin, or is your hand still raised?
Sorry, I'll take it down. Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay.
Julie.
Yeah. So there's 2 more issues in this paper. In fact, sorry, 3. One is Goodwin Case. I won't go into this in a lot of detail, but it's a similar discrimination case to McLeod. To do with survivors' benefits. It's a discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation. A male dependent of a female member was entitled to less of a pension than either a female dependent of a male member or a female dependent of a female member. So again, the government have just lost that case, and similarly to McLeod, there'll be a rectification of benefits for the resolution of that. It's expected to have an even smaller liability impact than McLeod, but again, significant in terms of admin, and particularly round about the people who would be affected could be It could be old cases, it could be people that the fund doesn't have the details of, so there could be quite a significant amount of work in terms of the resolution to that from an admin perspective as well.
Okay.
The third thing to mention is the 95k cap. This is could be quite significant in terms of for local authorities in particular, but also some academies and potentially colleges. And the government have put in place a cap on the exit payment. So if somebody's made redundant, aged over 55, they are eligible for immediate receipt of their pension. There's a strain cost associated with that. So because the pension is paid earlier, it costs more money. We calculate a pension strain. And that pension strain amount is included within the calculation of the 95k cap. So any other payments that member may get on being made redundant, plus the pension strain cost, if that exceeds £95,000, then they will have to have their pension reduced to reduce that strain cost within that 95k cap. It doesn't actually catch potentially the people it was intended to catch. So I think the intent behind it was to ensure there wasn't really large payouts going to high earners and getting made redundant from a local government scheme. It can actually catch, there's some examples in the paper, but a pension strain cost in itself can be quite easily in excess of the cap. The example we've got is a member aged 55 with 30 years service earning £30,000 and their pension strain cost is £112,000. So although it's potentially not so much of a fund issue, it will be an employer issue. It will affect members' benefits, and it will also affect if any councils are considering redundancy exercises, which we know people are doing around the country, in particular in light of the budgetary constraints caused by COVID. Another part of that consultation, so that in the 95k cap is just gone through Parliament this week, I think, but there's another sort of unexpected part of that consultation, which was to limit the exit payments of all people that are being made retired, so all people that are retiring over age 55, regardless of whether that 95k cap is breached, they will have their strain cost reduced by the amount of their statutory redundancy pay, which means they will get less in benefits. So the strain cost will be less to pay from an employer perspective, but the employees will get a smaller benefit. So there's quite significant considerations round about that. That's again, it looks very much as if that's going to come into force by the end of the year. So as of next year, we expect that to come into play.
Thank you. I mean, that sounds to me there must have been an awful lot of consultation for that, because interfering with members' pensions is a white hot issue, I should think, and I no doubt the unions have all been consulted and before it got to this stage. But again, this is something which we must, whatever is agreed, we can't do anything about it. It's that it'll become law or part of the scheme.
Yeah, it'll become so 95k cap already is law. There was a consultation. I think there was lots of consultation responses. I don't think any of the consultation responses made it into the final the final regulations. I would be very surprised if this doesn't end up in court as well. There's also some issues round about administering it, because you have to calculate the strain costs to communicate to members. So ultimately, members may be expecting to receive one benefit in this circumstance and they'll actually get another, or they'll have to pay from their own funds to receive that pension. So it will be, it already is a significant issue in the LGPS at the moment. And the final bit of the update was there was new regulations to allow the fund more flexibility in terms of how it manages its employers. There's the ability to review contribution rates for employers in between valuations. So previously that was only allowed under quite specific circumstances, and it's given funds more freedom to do that should they be required, particularly in light of if you thought there was a change in the covenant of an employer. An employer can also request to have its own contribution rate recalculated, and there is the ability to, there's more flexibility around about managing an exit from an employer in the fund as well. So we sometimes have seen the case in the past where an employer can't afford to stay in the scheme, but it's also too expensive for them to leave, and that's not a great position for the fund to be in. You can end up with a, ultimately an unpaid debt. So the new regulations allow more flexibilities around about being able to manage exit, allowing either spreading of exit payments over a period of time, or the employer remains in the fund with low active employees, and we just redetermine a rate at every formal valuation. So there'll be also a little bit of work with the funds officers to determine how those, what way the fund want to use those new flexibilities that are available, and setting in place a policy to ensure that that's clear to all of the fund's employers.
Thank you, Julie. But it seems to me there's not much this is an update. You're telling us what's going to happen. There's not much we can do with the debate. The consultations have apparently taken place, and the government's putting this through, and we can only wait to see what is finally decided by government, and then work out what the cost, if any, is to us. But usually it means that we're going to have to be spending some money. I mean, that's the way I see it. It's just a question of how much, and it's no good telling them that we can't afford it, because they'll tell you to afford it anyway. But in all this, my real concern with all this question of costs is the effect on the ratepayers eventually, because it's quite clear that local authority family is going to be under severe stress anyway when we get our next budget, and the extra costs which we've all had, which the authorities have had to incur, is not helping them to cope with their core work, and so I can expect we'll get so many complaints if this is going to cost us a great deal. But that's not going to be your problem, but you're just warning us that there's dark clouds on the horizon. So I'd like to move. I'd like to move on.
That's great.
What?
Sorry.
Funding, the updated funding.
I want to move on to that, to the funding, and leave behind those things which you've mentioned so far. I don't think there's any point in us discussing them. But if you could move on to the funding, please, Julie.
Sure. So, this is really just an update on your funding position. Not too much to say on it. Obviously, your funding position has come down a little bit since the last formal valuation, primarily due to the drop in Q1 of 2020 was there was a poor return in terms of investment returns. But from a funding perspective, you expect volatility. We monitor that as we go. Your actual return is still slightly ahead of what we had allowed for at the formal valuation. So, really, the funding update again is just a little bit more for your information, unless there's any particular questions on that.
Any question on the present funding position as set out in the paper?
Sorry, Ray. Peter Clark has his hand raised.
Peter Clark.
Yeah, it's just there's probably just one thing going back to the other thing, which isn't a question, but it's just I don't understand at all what the impact will be on members. It's just too complicated for me to understand. Is there somewhere I can get a better idea of that? I don't want you to go into it now, but that's what people are going to be. If they suddenly find their benefits have changed a lot, then there's going to be hell to pay.
In all humility, I don't think you're the only one who's confused. And I'm sure that we'll need some clarification. Who is the best person to do that? I think we have to ask our administration to look at it. But clearly, many of these matters are not immediately won't be immediately clear to members, and we'll have to, when the full impact is known, as Julie says, this is a report, an update report. When we know the full impact of those things over which we have no control, then I think how we manage them is something which we'll need to go into, and then they'll have to be explained more in greater detail. And I suspect, Peter, you'll be drafted onto the project team like Colin, so you better watch out. So,
okay. I've just got a funding question, but I think it's a very short one. Presumably, it's too early to know if things like long COVID will lead to more ill health retirement.
Yeah, there is. It's too early to tell what the effects are. Whether people that have died are people that were close to close to death anyway, or it could go the other way if you have sort of young people's. You've got young deaths, they can actually end up costing the scheme more, and obviously we don't understand the long-term impacts yet. But if you look at, Kymes have got a subsidiary company that Gloucestershire subscribed to called Club Vita. They've been doing lots and lots of work on the mortality impact, and they've done some quite interesting blogs on it. Worth a look if you want to keep up to date.
Thank you, Julie. Well, Julie, I think you've left us fairly dumbfounded. I mean, at least you have me. But there are lots of issues there which are going to need clarification, so our members do understand them more fully. But thank you very much for your contribution today and for being so patient with us in what are probably questions which you feel are a bit juvenile. But there we are. That's at least how I am. I'm pretty juvenile about some of these things. But no doubt you'll have the opportunity of educating us further later on when some of these items are clearer.
There should be full details in the paper, but none of these issues are straightforward or easily resolved. So all the details are in there.
Okay, Julie, thank you very much. Members, can we move on then to the next item on the agenda? Julie, you're very welcome to stay.
Choose the next item.
Oh, you're the next item. Oh gosh, poor you.
I can do a bit of intro.
Okay, you're going to say a few words first, then, Paul.
Yeah. I'll say a couple of words. Let Julie get a drink.
You nearly escaped then, Julie.
We're on to item 8, which is the exit credit policy. And as Julie will go into detail, but this is a policy that needs the committee approval. It's a policy that's needed to ensure that all employers who actually decide to leave the fund are treated in a consistent and equitable way when we calculate any exit credits or exit payments that are due to them. It's important to note that this policy is only applicable to people who've joined the scheme prior to March 2018. The actuaries will be involved in advising on what the actual exit payment will be, and if it's due, and then we pay them. So basically, we need to have a policy that the committee has agreed to ensure that we treat everyone in a fair and equitable way. It's quite a detailed policy, and Julie can go into kind of the detail, but we do need the committee to approve it.
Okay, Julie?
Okay. So about the background here. Prior to these regulation changes, the funds would charge a debt if anyone was in deficit when they left the scheme. And after that, if there was any surplus left over, then it just remained in the scheme. So the exit credit regulations were intended to kind of address that balance, so try to make the risk a little bit more symmetrical. However, it's not really quite achieved that in terms of some of the nuances and the things which the fund have to take into account. So when the fund is calculating or recalculate on behalf of the fund surplus, we have to show the extent to which the excess in the fund, so the surplus amount, how much that is relative, the excess of assets relative to liabilities, and also what proportion of that excess is in relation to employer contributions. The reason for that was to try to, so there had been cases where a contractor would join the fund were in the fund for a relatively short period of time, had really great investment returns, and were potentially receiving back a surplus that was greater than all of the contributions they had paid into the scheme. So it was trying to address that. However, you could also have employers who have been in the scheme for a long time, where we don't have the contribution history since they joined, and so that in itself is a little bit of a kind of tricky aspect of these regulations, and we'll probably address them on a case-by-case basis as they arise. It does give the fund some flexibilities in terms of allowing for example, if there's a risk-sharing agreement in place, so where councils maybe outsourced a service but retained all the pensions risk, the fund can make allowance for that in terms of repayment of an exit credit. So where an employer wouldn't have been on the hook for a deficit payment, for example, we wouldn't expect them to be in receipt of a surplus payment either. I won't go into the details of this. We have set it out in terms of different types of bodies, so who would and who wouldn't be eligible for a surplus payment. But in summary, the people that you would expect to be paying back a surplus to would be anybody who had contributed to the scheme throughout their participation, would have been on the hook for a deficit at the point that they had left, and that surplus has arisen through the contributions that they have paid effectively, and investment returns, but not to the extent that the investment returns mean that they almost get a free free contribution to the pension fund.
Julie, just to be clear, we're talking about employers here, not the individual employees.
Employers.
The employees who signed up under the LGPS scheme will continue to have the full benefit, whatever happens to their employer. Their employer may have to put in further amounts, but as far as the individuals are concerned, they're still protected under the terms of the agreements of the LGPS scheme. So we're only talking about employers.
All about
I think that's an important point to make, because some people. Now then, members, are there any questions?
Got questions? Sean has his hand raised. And
Sean? You're muted, Sean.
I've withdrawn my question. I think Paul said March, and I think it's actually May, which is the effective date. So I thought it was too trivial to check it out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification, Sean. Anybody else got anything to say? Otherwise, we'll just we have to vote on this, don't we, Paul?
Hang on. Sorry, Peter. Question.
Peter, I thought you were very silent.
No, I didn't have a question. As you say, employers to employers, which I know is really important, but I'm mainly here as the voice of the members. So
Apologies, hands were still raised. Can I just ask members, when they finish their question, can they please lower their hand? Thank you.
Thank you, members. If there are no other questions, or I'm just going to go to the vote on this one. The officer's recommendation is to accept the policy as set out in these pages. Is that correct, Paul?
Yeah.
All in favour of? Well, put it the other way. Is there anybody now? Then, Colin, what are you up to? Yes.
No,
you're muted.
I'm just voting.
Just voting. That's right. Okay. Is there anybody against this? So everybody is for it. Then that is carried. Thank you very much, Julie.
Thank you.
What you've said is of course very technical from our angle, but a lot of this will come out in the wash when we get some of the more information that's coming through. But thank you very much for explaining it all to us, and we will no doubt have to revert to you for further advice later on. But thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll drop off.
Okay. Thank you, Julie. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
So we now move on to item 9, which is the Pension Fund Risk Register. Paul Blacker.
Okay,
Mine. I don't think it makes any difference.
okay, thank you, Chair. Those people who have been on the committee for a while have realised this is a report that comes regularly to the committee. But obviously, the last time we looked at it was in February of this year. And the world has changed quite significantly since then. So this is kind of an update. It's a long report. So what I'll do is just concentrate on the new risks or those risks that have changed. They've helpfully been highlighted in yellow in your report, so we can pick out those changes quite quickly. I'll go to the first one, which is the new one, which is AR5. This is a COVID-19 risk, and it's about what's the risk of the detrimental impact on the ability of the pension team to provide a full service as a result of COVID-19. It obviously is a significant risk because we had to change the way we worked during this time. But I'm glad to report that the pension team has responded really well. The pension admin team couldn't complete their tasks entirely at home. So to ensure they were COVID safe, we split the team into two and also introduced social distancing. As a result, we continue to provide a full service. I think it operated very effectively. We'll have a look at the performance statistics later, but the calculation and payment of all new pensions were completed, payment of all new death grants were completed, and the annual benefit statements were issued by the appropriate deadline. So I think it was a risk because it did change the way we work significantly, but during that time, I think we continued to provide an effective service. Some working from home and some working in the office. The finance and investment team, they all worked from home from kind of day one of lockdown, and they continue to provide a service. The big issue they've been looking at, obviously, is production of the business plan, and also, which is later in the report, and also dealing with the external audits. Grant Thornton. So we've now got the kind of annual report to a draft stage, and we've finished the formal audit, and that will be going to Audit Governance Committee at the end of October. So it was a risk that was recognised, but I think one that we managed to mitigate and continue through the difficult service. Obviously, it was coincided with no head of pensions either. So I mean, I'd like to thank the team kind of publicly for managing during what was quite a challenging time, both because they had no head of service and also because of the significant disruption that potentially could have been caused by COVID. But we did continue to provide an effective and efficient service during that time. But it was right that we put that risk as a risk in the risk register. So we go on to the changes in the risk register. The first one that's changed is F1, which is the failure to deliver the expected investment returns. Later on, we'll have a look at our valuations, and you will see that during quarter one, there was a significant drop in the value in our valuations, and that was reflected in the weakness in the equities market. But you also noted in quarter two that the vast majority of that sort of reduction in value had been sort of recovered by the end of June. Obviously, we've increased the risk slightly from previously, because although we've managed to get through the first two quarters okay and recover that lost income or those lost investment returns, there obviously now is a risk of a second peak and what the impact of that's going to be. So the potential and the risk has increased, because obviously in the second half of the year, there will be some more significant sort of risks associated with investment returns, which we will obviously try and mitigate, working closely with Brunel. The second one that's changed is F2, and that's inappropriate long-term investment strategy. The strategic asset review was approved in February 2020 by this committee, and it is in the process of being implemented. We're still heavily weighted on equities, and because of the risk above and the uncertainties in the market caused by COVID and the potential downturn, this is still a risk. But we are working towards realigning our asset allocation in line with that, with the strategic allocation approved in February. There was a slight delay in that caused by COVID, while we want to reassess. And one of the tasks, I think, of the new head of pensions will be to reassess our strategic asset allocation in the light of COVID-19, because one of the commitments we made was to move significantly into property and international property. We haven't moved on that because of the uncertainty created by COVID in the property market, so we will be reviewing that. But obviously there are risks associated with that caused by COVID. And the next one that's increased slightly is F4, increasing pension fund deficit. As we saw from the previous item, or item 7, when we had the actuarial review, the pension fund deficit, we were, during the 2019 valuation, we were 102% valued, but now it's gone down to 97%. That's not a full actuarial valuation, but that's the estimate. So obviously it's right that that risk has increased. But to put it into context, when we had the valuation in 2016, we were only 80% valued. So, you know, we are, even at 97%, it's a significant improvement that's on the 2016 position. But it is a slight reduction on the valuation that took place last financial year, when the whole fund was 102% valued. And then the final one that's changed is G5, which is the lack of relevant experience. Obviously, when we produced this report, it was right to increase that because we didn't have a head of pensions. I was kind of doing it on an interim basis, and a couple of people had stepped up to do additional duties, and we had some consultancy support. So when we produced this report, the risk had increased. But given that we now have a head of pensions, I would say that that risk has now reduced and will go back down to the residual risk that we had reported previously. There's always a risk of retaining staff because it is a very specialist job. And as we heard from Julie, there are lots of challenges coming up, and we need to ensure that all our staff are well trained and understand these new things and are in a position to facilitate and introduce any new legislation and changes that the government introduced. But predominantly that was increased because we had no head of pensions. But as I said, that situation has now been resolved. So they're the changes. But obviously if councillors have questions on any of the other risks that haven't changed, they're welcome to ask them now. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for the work you've been doing, standing in for the pensions fund manager who wasn't there, but is at least on the horizon.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Members, any questions about the risk register? No.
We've got a question.
Peter?
Peter's got his hand raised.
Peter Clark.
Yep. Yeah, just on AR 1.1, which is pensions admin. Where is it? So I'm flipping between purple and blue. Yeah, so it's the cost from changes to the pension arrangements. I just wondered, given all the stuff that Hymans were explaining to us, and it sounded like there are 3 or 4 major projects coming up, are you confident that we're going to be sufficiently resourced? Is not an increased risk if the control measures spend more money?
We have recently appointed 2 new people to the admin team. I think before COVID we were quite confident that everything was okay, but obviously it takes a little bit longer to train people and get them up to speed in a remote office environment. But I think the 2 people that we've got in are proving, to be valuable assets. We're training them up, and I think, as Julie said, a lot of the consequences of the potential changes that the government are going to introduce are unknown at the moment. We're actually in quite a good position because we have kept good records for past employees and employers. So I feel we're in a good position. I don't think the risk should be increased at this stage, but it's one we're actively looking at as more details of the changes occur. we will maybe look to employ new people to cope with those, maybe on a short-term or permanent basis, depending on what the changes are. And it's a risk that we will review. I'm currently happy with the current risk assessment, but it is one, like all risks, that we'll keep under review.
You're muted, Ray.
Can I raise a question?
Yes, Sean. Sorry, I'm just raised at the moment.
I don't know if you can answer this, but I might have maybe also have asked this earlier. As we're moving to very low rates of interest, what is the impact arising? And the discount rate is going to change significantly, I suspect. And that must have an impact. Do we actually assess that, or do we just leave it to the actuaries on the third, the triennial valuation? I'm not quite certain if we need to take it into account. I mean, there's talk about we may be going into negative interest rates, which must have a huge impact on the discount rate where we assess our liabilities.
Yeah, can I? Yeah. I was just going to say, I saw John was indicating, but that's one of the topics that John wants to discuss when we discuss his report later on in the agenda. He wants to look at interest rates, inflation, etc., and the relationship between the two, and what potential is. So if we can save that to it, it'd be really great.
Thank you. Any more questions on the risk register? No? Then we'll move on. Thank you very much, members. Then let's move on to item 10, which is the pension fund business plan. And again, over to you, Paul.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This is something that we bring to the committee each year. Obviously, it was delayed slightly by kind of COVID. I'll take it for granted that the councillors have read that. But just to say, the main items are Section 4. That goes through the key policies that the pension fund has to have. And there's 3 that are due to review this year. That's the communication strategy, the governance compliance strategy, and the governance policy strategy. And they're currently being reviewed. And that's another task that we will get the new head of pensions to finalise those reviews. And then Section 4 lays down the key tasks and milestones, just to remind people what we do. And then Section 5 lays out the budget for next year, or this financial year now. Just to draw attention, there's 2 large changes in the budget if you compare the 2 years. External fund manager fees have increased from 2,000, what they were last year in 1920, to what they are now. The one thing to say is that they are still below the 6.5 million that was in the 2018-19 budget. But I think we overestimated the kind of investment fund fees savings that we would get through Brunel. We have achieved savings, but not as significant as we estimated when we did the last year's budget. But we've based those on actuals this year and last year, so we're pretty confident that's correct. But the important point is that the fees are still lower than they were in previous years in 2018-19. And then the other increase is a 65,000 increase in the staffing budget. And that relates to the previous question asked about, have we got sufficient resources to administer the scheme? And I think historically we have struggled, and that's just a recognition that we do need to employ new people. And we've got the budgetary revision to do that. And then finally, Section 6 lays down the administrative and training objectives. And we do measure what training people receive. So just that goes back to the statement I made at the beginning, just to remind members of the LGA fundamentals course. If people haven't been on that, that is available in early next month, and it's free, and it's much shorter because it's online. So if people haven't been on it, I would encourage them, if they've got the time available, to attend that course. And Andrea has sent out details of those courses. Okay. So that's all I've got to say. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Now, members, any questions, please?
We've got Colin and Sean waiting.
Right, Colin? Can't see you. There you are, yes. Colin, then please move on.
what I was going to say on the business plan, and it sets out our objectives and the funding strategy, etc. Because it's a public document in that sense, I think it would be useful to incorporate something about both the pension fund and Brunel's commitment to ESG. I think it's worthwhile putting that in, because our investments go through Brunel, but I think our own sort of interest in it is worthwhile. And I think as we move forward, we'll see that still complies with prudent investment. But I think it should be at least mentioned or noted in the business plan.
Governance policy statement, you mean? Is that where it should? Is that what you'd like it to be?
To be honest, I don't mind where it goes.
We could add a couple. We can put something
it should
in.
Be referenced anyway.
Yeah. Okay, Colin. Thanks. Sorry, who was that? Who else was there? Sean. No.
Yeah, sure.
Sean's muted, but he's shaking his head.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you very much, Paul, for that. This is for noting, yes, or is it?
Yes, it's for noting.
Yeah. It's just for noting.
It's for noting. So we don't need to vote. Right. Okay. We'll move on then. We just note that. Thank you, members. The next item is for on the pension administration report, pages 71, 74. As Paul and Alan Marshall. Alan Marshall has joined us. Hello. Good morning, Alan. Morning.
Okay. I'll just quickly start this, Chair. Alan's here to kind of answer the detailed questions, but this really is just our administrative report to say how the admin team has performed during this time. I mean, the point I'd like to make before we start is that it has been an incredibly difficult time during COVID, and the admin team has responded really well. I think I mentioned this earlier. So I'd just like, before going into the detail, to thank Alan and his team for the hard work they've done, and the fact that we've continued to provide an effective and efficient service during this time, and met all our key aims and objectives. And in some cases, we've actually improved on our performance from previous years. So I think that's something that's kind of to be proud of. We obviously never rest on our laurels, always room for improvement. But we have, I think, done remarkably well in the first half of this financial year during what has been a difficult time. And the staff have adapted, and we have continued to provide that effective service during this time. So I won't go into the detail of the performance. But if you've got any specific questions, myself and Alan will do our best to answer those.
Members, any questions?
We have
Come on, Peter Clark. I'm sure you can.
Peter Clark's got a question.
Sure. I'm sure
you're not
Peter.
wrong, Ray. Yeah, you're not wrong. Yeah, it's just there's a couple of areas on there that not. I mean, I can see this year actually it's improved a bit, but retirements and lump sums had fallen for 3 years in a row. I'm not
Sorry,
even
Peter,
sure
we lost you there
that.
when you were making your main point. Could you repeat it, please?
Yeah, so looking at table 1, retirements and lump, and the performance has been for a number of years. So I'm not. Have you got? That's part I talked about resourcing action, because do we know why that's been happening? I can ticked up a bit now. Obviously, in the circumstances, that's amazing, and I do. Thanks very much, Alan, who's already helped anyway. I just wasn't sure
Is that death grants paid 8 days? Is that the question? That's the one. Alan, have you got any comment to make on that? You're muted.
Sorry, yeah. If I could, thank you. I mean, just if we look at the retirements, first of all, I think the one thing that perhaps the performance indicator doesn't necessarily indicate is actually the number of additional retirements we've got. So, I mean, if we look, for example, at 17-18, we actually processed 768 retirements. In 18-19, that went up to 858. That's nearly a 12% increase. And in 19-20, that actually went up to 983. That was nearly a 15% increase. So with everything else going on, the fact that we are trying to build the resource, so as I'm sure Paul's already sort of mentioned to you before, we've been, and I know it's come up in previous pension committees, we've been trying to increase our resource for a few years now. But obviously, because of the technical nature of what we do, we have to kind of limit how many people we bring in at any one time, because they literally have to work shadow people. So we've only got so much time, because otherwise it's going to put us back too far. So what we try and do, so we brought in 3 staff 1 year, 4 the next year. We've just brought in another 2, and unfortunately then that got hit with the COVID situation, which made life particularly difficult. But we are very much aware that I think there is going to be this increasing call on what we're doing. So we're trying to bring in staff as quickly as we can, build the experience. My personal opinion about everything we do has always been about accuracy. I'm quite retentive about the whole thing about getting things right. And certainly, you know, we have no indications that we've lost any of the accuracy we've always had, and I pride ourselves on that. So to say, although I appreciate the performance indicators do appear to have gone down, it's very much within a context that the demand has very much gone up. And as I say, over basically a 2-year period, just looking at retirements, we've had a sort of 28% increase in the number of retirements we've had to process. And that's not just that area. In most areas, we've actually had quite a substantial increase as well. So,
thank you. If I may ask Alan, the working from home, I think Paul was explaining earlier on that you've got 2 teams now who are. Yeah. Is there anybody working from home, or are they all working in the office, but on this, as I might describe, this shift system?
No. So what we've done is because with everything we do, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, there's a lot of paperwork involved in pensions administration, an awful lot, whether it be between us and the scheme member, or between us and other pension schemes where someone wants to transfer benefits. Now, obviously, to scan all of that, what we could do is we could have said to everybody, we want you all to work from home, and we could try and scan all of that paperwork. But on the basis that we are up against a lot of pressure resource-wise, my view was that was abortive work. So what we've done is we've split the team into 2 sub-teams, and what we've done is we've split the work as well into those jobs that can be done effectively from home without having to do too much scanning, abortive scanning, and those jobs that are very paper hungry, if you like, and really need to be done in the office. And so as part of the switching round, the rotation, the weekly rotation, the team at home are doing all those jobs that can effectively be done at home without too much paperwork. And then all the jobs that are very paper hungry are all done in the office. And that's literally where the teams are swapping round. So we've got full resource working at any given time. It's just half of the team are physically in the office and half of the team at the same time are physically working at home.
Yeah, if you're employing new people, of course, they can't easily work from home. They've got to find, acquaint themselves with what it is you're up to and the systems you're employing and how you go about your work and and all that. So I presume it'd be unrealistic if you're taking on people to expect them to stay at home all the time. They must have some engagement with their management teams.
Absolutely. In fact, the 2 new staff, when they were first appointed, so they were due to come in, I think it was the week that COVID locked down, which was typical, very unfortunate. And we unfortunately weren't able to, during that first couple of months, we weren't able to actually start them working because we weren't able to bring them in the office. And you're absolutely right, Ray. It's not something that people could do from home without having that shadowing. What's actually happening now is that those staff have now for a couple of months been in the office, and those 2 staff are actually in the office all the time, as am I, and because I'm just kind of making sure that everything's working okay. But those 2 staff are in all the time, and they are work shadowing different members of staff. We make sure they're socially distanced, and where we can get them physically working on their own, we do. But what they do have is somebody on hand, literally there with them in the office, if they've got any questions at all. So again, it retains that that way that I like to do things, of making sure that we keep up our accuracy, and actually they've always got someone there to help them. And it's going very well now. I mean, they're both excellent employees, really pleased with them, and they're progressing well in the circumstances.
I think all members would say that it's very important for us to be right on top of our administration. And I know that there are some authorities where the pensions regulator has descended on them and has caused them untold of trouble. When I say trouble, turns them upside down, inside out, and that would be very unhelpful. So if there are resource issues in that area, please do flag them up immediately so that we can attend to them, because we must always keep well on top of that particular work. And thank you very much for the improvement that you have achieved over the last couple of years, because I know we did get a bit behind. So, members, sorry, are there any other questions from members?
There's Sean.
So
Sean?
I didn't want to put a question, and certainly I don't want to go down the Oxford route. But I'd like to really join in what Paul was saying, is to thank all the staff for actually performing what is really a very efficient and effective service. And I think I would like it recorded as such. But,
yes.
And I'm certain that the other members of the committee would actually like to publicly record the fact that we do appreciate all the work they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's right. And Colin, I see you're signalling your agreement too. I think all members would agree with that. So thank you and your team, Alan, very much indeed. If there are no further questions from members, then we'll move on to the next item. But thank you very much.
Could I just thank you for your... Sorry, could I just thank you for your comments, and I will pass them on to the team, because I know they will greatly appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So we now move on, members, to item 12, market valuation quarterly performance. Paul.
Okay.
75 onwards.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Chair. I don't propose to go into much detail on this, because we can have a full discussion when we look at the next agenda item with John Arthur's kind of investment report. Because we haven't met since February, we're looking at 2 quarters. And also, I've attached the detailed Brunel report for members' information. I know members have traditionally found that too long, but I just put it there for information. And then it often duplicates what John Arthur speaks about later. So I don't intend to go through that in any detail, and we haven't got a member of Brunel here to go through that in detail. But I think the highlights basically are that if we look at the performance report, has been wide on page 75 and 77. Yeah. So 75 was the summary of performance of Q1, and 77 is the performance in Q2. Obviously, if you look back at Q1, there was a significant reduction, and that was mainly around equities as a result of COVID. But then if you move on to Q2, which is the end of June, you will see that actually the majority of that lost value has been recovered by the end of June. So that's the highlights. Although they've been 2 exceptional quarters, one exceptionally bad and one not exceptionally good, but it recovered what we'd lost in the previous quarter. I think given the situation, we're probably expecting that kind of volatility in the next 6 months or 12 months. So really not much to say apart from that. As I said, the highlight is that it did go down as a result of COVID initially, but the markets have bounced back, and that's reflected in our valuations. Like all performance, the performance of the different fund has varied. Some funds have been really good, other funds not so good. But as I said, John will go through that kind of detail, looking at each individual fund and also looking to the future. So nothing else to say on that particular item unless any particular questions, but John will go into the detail in his report.
You're muted, Ray.
To deal with the details of that report and any other comments you've got to make, then we'll move on. We'll move on from this immediately. Is that okay with you, John? Can't hear you. Okay.
The beginning of your comment, but I'm quite happy to present now. Yes.
Yeah. Well, then you will just wrap this item more or less with your comments, John, if that's all right. Yep. Is that all right, members? Do we agree? Everybody's agree. Good. Right. So the next item on the agenda is the exclusion of the press and public. If they're hacking into this, please hack out. And anybody who shouldn't be listening, please don't listen. Do I have to read all this out, Andrea?
If you could,
in accordance with section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 72, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following agenda items because it is likely if members of the public were present, they would be disclosing them. Well, present there would be disclosure to them of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of the Schedule 12A of the Act, and the public interest in withholding the information outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information to the public. I think we have to vote on that, don't we?
Are members in agreement with that?
Everybody agree? Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, members. Exempt minutes.